My son's wife said my cooking was poison, so I stopped paying for their groceries. My name is Dolores Mitchell. I'm 67 years old, and I live in a cozy 2-story colonial in the same neighborhood where I raised my children in Akron, Ohio. I've been in this house for 38 years, and these walls have seen countless family dinners, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings. This is the story of how my daughter-in-law crossed a line she never should have, and how I finally taught her, and my son, a lesson they'd never forget. Starting when she sat down at my table and called my cooking poison right to my face. Let me paint you a picture of who I am, because it matters for this story. I'm not just any grandmother. I'm the woman who spent 43 years married to my late husband, Frank, raising 3 children while working part-time at the local credit union. When Frank passed 5 years ago, he left me well provided for. Between his pension, our investments, and the life insurance, I'm what you might call comfortably retired. I don't say this to brag, but because it's important you understand. I have choices. I help my family because I want to, not because I have to. My kitchen has always been the heart of my home. It's where I taught my children to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, where I rolled out thousands of Christmas cookies, and where I perfected my grandmother's recipes that came over from Poland in 1924. My pierogi are legendary in this neighborhood. I'm not being immodest. It's just fact. Mrs. Henderson from next door still brings me her grocery list, hoping I'll make extra and share. The church ladies always request my poppy seed cake for the annual fundraiser. Cooking isn't just what I do. It's who I am. When my youngest son Marcus got married to Vivian 3 years ago, I was cautiously optimistic. Vivian seemed nice enough at first. Quiet, well-dressed, with one of those smiles that never quite reached her eyes. She worked in marketing for some tech company downtown, and always seemed to be checking her phone, even during family conversations. But Marcus was happy, and that's what mattered to me. The first red flag came during their engagement party. I'd spent 2 days preparing a feast. My famous stuffed cabbage, homemade bread, 3 different desserts. As I was setting out the dishes, I overheard Vivian talking to her sister near the powder room. "It's all so heavy," she was saying. "I mean, who eats this much butter and cream anymore? I hope she doesn't expect me to cook like this when we're married." I stood there holding my grandmother's crystal serving bowl, feeling like I'd been slapped. But I told myself she was just nervous about the wedding, maybe stressed about impressing my family. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. After they got married, Marcus and Vivian moved into a nice apartment about 20 minutes away. It was one of those modern places with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked beautiful, but felt cold to me. Vivian worked long hours and often seemed overwhelmed by basic household tasks. Marcus, bless his heart, tried his best, but he'd never been much of a cook. That's when I started helping with their groceries. It began innocently enough. I'd noticed they were eating a lot of takeout when I'd called during dinner time. One evening, Marcus mentioned they'd spent almost $200 on DoorDash that week alone. As someone who'd stretched a grocery budget to feed a family of 5 for decades, this horrified me. "Let me help," I offered. "I can pick up groceries for you when I do my shopping. It's no trouble at all." Marcus protested, but I insisted. "Honey, I have the time and I know how to shop smart. Let me do this for you." What started as occasional grocery runs soon became a weekly routine. Every Saturday, I'd drive to the big Kroger with my list and theirs. I'd use my senior discount, my coupons, and my knowledge of sales to stretch their money. I'd buy them good, wholesome ingredients, fresh vegetables, quality meats, dairy products. I even started picking up specialty items I thought Vivienne might like. Organic this, gluten-free that. But here's the thing I didn't realize until much later. I wasn't just buying their groceries. I was completely subsidizing their food budget. When I say I was helping, what I really mean is that I was paying for everything. Their grocery list became my grocery bill. Frank always said I was too generous for my own good, and he was right. I justified it by telling myself that this was what mothers do. We help our children get established. And seeing Marcus's relief when I'd show up with bags of groceries made it feel worthwhile. He'd hug me and say, "Mom, you're a lifesaver. I don't know what we'd do without you." The arrangement worked well for about a year. I'd deliver the groceries on Saturday afternoons, and often Vivian would invite me to stay for coffee. We'd chat about her job, their plans, neighborhood gossip. I thought we were building a relationship. But slowly, things started to change. It began with small comments. I'd bring over fresh ingredients for a pot roast, and Vivian would say, "Oh, that's so much red meat. We're trying to eat lighter." I'd pick up ingredients for my famous chicken paprikash, and she'd mention how cream-based sauces were so hard on the digestive system. At first, I adapted. I started buying more fish, more vegetables, more of those organic, free-range, hormone-free products that cost twice as much as regular groceries. My weekly shopping bill went from about $60 for their groceries to over $150. But I wanted to make Vivian happy. I wanted her to see that I was trying to understand her preferences. The comments got more frequent and more pointed. "Dolores, did you know that too much sodium can cause serious health problems?" she'd say, looking at the perfectly normal canned tomatoes I'd bought. "I read an article about how much sugar is hidden in processed foods," she'd mention, holding up a loaf of whole wheat bread like it was evidence in a murder trial. "I'm just concerned about Marcus's health," became her favorite phrase. As if I, the woman who'd kept her son healthy and strong for 34 years, didn't know what was good for him. The worst part was that Marcus started echoing her concerns. My son, who'd grown up loving my cooking, who'd begged me to teach him how to make my pierogi when he moved out, started making comments about eating cleaner and being more mindful about nutrition. I felt like I was losing my son to someone who thought everything I'd ever taught him about food was wrong. But I kept buying their groceries. Every Saturday, like clockwork. Even when Vivienne started texting me specific brand names, the most expensive organic options, specialty items from the health food store that cost 3 times what normal groceries cost. Even when she started asking for things like $30 bottles of olive oil and $40 bags of some superfood flour I'd never heard of. I was spending over $200 a week on their groceries alone. That's over $10,000 a year. But I told myself it was an investment in their well-being, in our relationship. I should have seen where this was heading. The breaking point came on a Sunday in early October. I'd invited Marcus and Vivian for dinner, like I did most Sundays. It was a tradition Frank and I had started when our children were young. Sunday dinner brought the family together. Even after Frank passed, I'd kept up the tradition with whoever could make it. That particular Sunday, I'd spent most of Saturday preparing. I made my grandmother's beef stew, the recipe that had been passed down through 4 generations of Polish women. I slow-cooked it for hours, letting the flavors meld together perfectly. I made fresh bread from scratch, kneading the dough by hand the way my mother taught me. I prepared my famous green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top, and for dessert, I'd made Frank's favorite apple pie using apples from the tree in our backyard. Marcus arrived first, like he always did. He kissed my cheek and immediately headed for the kitchen, drawn by the familiar smells of home. "Mom, it smells incredible in here," he said, lifting the lid on the stew pot and breathing deeply. "I haven't had your beef stew in forever." For a moment, it was like old times. My son was home, appreciating the food I'd made with love. and I felt that warm satisfaction that comes from feeding the people you care about. Then Vivian arrived. She walked into my kitchen wearing a crisp white blouse and black slacks, looking like she was dressed for a business meeting rather than a family dinner. She air-kissed my cheek, barely making contact, and immediately started looking around my kitchen with what I can only describe as barely concealed disdain. "Something smells rich," she said, her nose wrinkling slightly. I chose to take it as a compliment. "Thank you, dear. I hope you're hungry. I made plenty." We sat down at my dining room table, the same table where I'd served thousands of family meals. I'd set it with my wedding china, the good silverware, cloth napkins. I'd even picked some late-blooming roses from my garden for the centerpiece. I served everyone generous portions, proud of how beautiful everything looked on the plates. The stew was rich and dark, with tender chunks of beef and perfectly cooked vegetables. The bread was golden and crusty on the outside, soft and warm on the inside. It was a meal made with love and decades of experience. Marcus dug in immediately, making those appreciative sounds that every mother loves to hear. "Mom, this is amazing," he said between bites. "This is exactly like I remember from when I was a kid." I felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. This was why I cooked. This was why I'd spent years perfecting these recipes. To see my family enjoying food made with my own hands. To be part of carrying on traditions that connected us to our heritage. Then, I looked at Vivian. She was picking at her food like she was looking for something wrong with it. Taking tiny bites, chewing slowly, her expression neutral but somehow disapproving. She hadn't touched the bread at all. She'd pushed most of the vegetables to one side of her plate. "How is everything, Vivian?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know if she was enjoying the meal. She set down her fork and looked directly at me. What she said next will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. "Dolores, I'm sorry, but I have to be honest. This food is basically poison. All this butter, all this cream, all this salt. I don't know how Marcus ate like this growing up and survived. No wonder heart disease runs in families." The dining room went completely silent. I felt like she'd reached across the table and slapped me. But it was worse than that. She'd just dismissed my cooking, my heritage, my love. Everything I'd poured into that meal as poison, not just inadequate or old-fashioned, but actually harmful. Toxic. Marcus looked stricken, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Vivian?" "What?" she continued, apparently not realizing the magnitude of what she'd just said. "I'm just being honest. This kind of cooking is why so many people our age are struggling with health issues. All this processed food, all these heavy sauces, it's not sustainable. It's not healthy." I sat there looking at this woman who'd been eating my groceries for 2 years, who'd never once cooked a meal for my son, who'd benefited from my generosity week after week, and I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't just anger, though. I was angry. It wasn't just hurt, though I was deeply hurt. It was a kind of clarity that comes when someone shows you exactly who they are. I stood up from the table. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to get something from the kitchen." But instead of going to the kitchen, I went to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed and took several deep breaths. I could hear Marcus and Vivian having a heated conversation downstairs, their voices carrying through my house. I thought about all the Saturday grocery runs, all the money I'd spent trying to make Vivian happy, all the specialty items, the organic products, the expensive ingredients I'd bought because she'd convinced me they were somehow better, healthier, more enlightened than the food I'd been preparing for decades. I thought about my grandmother, who'd survived the Great Depression by making delicious, nourishing meals from simple ingredients. I thought about my mother, who'd worked 2 jobs and still managed to put homemade dinner on the table every night. I thought about Frank, who'd eaten my cooking for 43 years and lived to be 79 years old with a clean bill of health right up until the heart attack that took him. I thought about all the church potlucks where people had specifically requested my dishes, all the neighbors who'd asked for my recipes, all the times my own children had called me, asking how to make this or that dish because they were homesick for my cooking. And I realized that I was done. I was done trying to earn approval from someone who would never give it. I was done subsidizing the lifestyle of someone who had just called my love poison. I was done being generous to someone who couldn't even pretend to be grateful. When I came back downstairs, Marcus was alone at the table. Vivian had apparently gone to the bathroom to freshen up. "Mom," Marcus started. "I'm so sorry. She didn't mean—" I held up my hand. "Marcus, I love you. You're my son, and that will never change. But I need you to understand something. I will not be disrespected in my own home. Not by anyone. Not anymore." She was just being honest about her dietary concerns. "No," I said firmly. "She called my cooking poison. She insulted not just me, but our family traditions, everything your grandmother and great-grandmother passed down to us. And she did it while sitting at my table, eating food I prepared with my own hands." When Vivian returned, I was clearing the table. She seemed surprised that I was cleaning up in the middle of dinner. "Oh, are we done eating?" she asked. "I am," I said simply. Marcus tried to salvage the evening, but the damage was done. They left about 20 minutes later, with Marcus promising to call me soon, and Vivian saying nothing at all. I spent the rest of that Sunday thinking, really thinking, about boundaries and respect and what it means to be family. Monday morning I made some phone calls. First, I called Kroger and removed Marcus and Vivian from my grocery pickup account. Then I called Instacart and canceled the weekly delivery I'd been sending to their apartment. I went through my credit card statements and calculated exactly how much I'd been spending on their groceries, an average of $212 per week for the past 2 years. Over $22,000. $22,000 spent on groceries for 2 people who apparently thought my cooking was poison. Tuesday, I changed my Saturday routine. Instead of driving to Kroger with 2 shopping lists, I went to the farmer's market. I bought beautiful fresh vegetables from local growers, homemade bread from the Amish stand, farm-fresh eggs from chickens I could see pecking around in the field. Then I came home and cooked for myself. A simple, delicious meal that I ate at my own table with my own good china. It was the most satisfying meal I'd had in months. Wednesday, Marcus called. "Mom, did you forget to do our grocery run? Vivian says our Instacart delivery never came." "I didn't forget," I said calmly. "I canceled it." There was a long pause. "You canceled it? Why?" "Marcus, your wife told me that my cooking is poison. I assumed she wouldn't want groceries purchased by someone who apparently doesn't know the difference between food and poison." "Mom, she didn't mean it like that." "How did she mean it exactly?" Another pause. "She was just concerned about health issues." "Marcus, I've been buying your groceries for 2 years. I've spent over $20,000 making sure you had good food in your refrigerator. I've catered to every dietary preference, every special request, every expensive organic ingredient your wife decided you needed. And in return, she called my cooking poison. At my own table, while eating food I made for her." I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I think it's time for you and Vivian to handle your own grocery shopping," I continued. "You're both adults with good jobs. I'm sure you'll figure it out." "But Mom," This isn't about the money, Marcus. This is about respect. When you're ready to have a conversation about that, you know where to find me. I hung up the phone feeling lighter than I had in years. Thursday. Vivian called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dolores," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I think you're overreacting to what happened Sunday. I was just trying to start a conversation about healthy eating." By calling my cooking poison? I was being honest about my concerns. "Vivian," I interrupted, "let me be honest about my concerns. You've been eating groceries that I paid for, cooked in my kitchen or in the kitchen of an apartment you share with my son, for 2 years. You've never once said thank you. You've never once offered to contribute to the cost. You've never once shown any gratitude for the fact that I've been subsidizing your food budget to the tune of over $20,000. Silence. "And then," I continued, "you sat at my table and called my cooking poison. You insulted not just me, but generations of women in my family who passed down these recipes. You were cruel and disrespectful, and apparently you think I should just accept that because you frame it as dietary concerns. I didn't realize you were keeping track of how much you spent. Of course you didn't realize, because you never thought about it. You never considered that groceries cost money, or that someone was paying for them, or that you might owe that someone basic courtesy if nothing else." More silence. "Dolores, I think we both said things we didn't mean. Maybe we can start over." "No," I said firmly. "We can't start over. You can't take back calling my cooking poison any more than I can take back 2 years of paying for your groceries. What's done is done." "So that's it? You're just gonna cut us off?" The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. "Vivian, I'm not cutting you off. I'm simply no longer paying for your food. If you think that's the same thing, that tells me everything I need to know about how you viewed our arrangement." I hung up feeling even better than I had after talking to Marcus. Friday, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my friend Ruth and invited her over for dinner. Ruth had been my friend since our children were in elementary school together, and she'd always loved my cooking. We drifted apart a bit after Frank died, partly because I'd been so focused on helping Marcus and Vivian. I made a simple but elegant meal: herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, and a lemon tart for dessert. We ate by candlelight and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Ruth complimented every dish and asked for 2 of my recipes. "Dolores," she said as she was getting ready to leave, "this was wonderful. I'd forgotten how much I love your cooking. We should do this more often." After she left, I realized how much I'd missed cooking for people who actually appreciated it. Saturday morning, I had a new routine. Instead of grocery shopping for 3 households, I was shopping for 1. I bought exactly what I wanted, when I wanted it. I selected the most beautiful piece of salmon I could find. I chose vegetables based on what looked freshest, not what someone else had put on a list. I bought a bottle of wine just because I liked the label. My grocery bill was $67. For the same amount of food I used to buy for myself, plus some treats I'd been denying myself because I was spending so much money on Marcus and Vivian's groceries. I came home and spent the afternoon cooking, not because I had to, not because someone expected it, but because I wanted to. I made a pot of my grandmother's pierogi filling and called Mrs. Henderson to see if she wanted to come over and learn how to make them properly. She was delighted. We spent 3 hours in my kitchen, rolling out dough, filling pockets, and sharing stories. Mrs. Henderson told me she'd been wanting to learn to make pierogi for years, but had been too intimidated to ask. I realized how much I'd missed teaching someone who actually wanted to learn. Sunday came and went without the usual family dinner. I won't lie, It felt strange. But I made myself a beautiful meal, set the table with my good china, and enjoyed every bite in peaceful solitude. Monday of the following week, Marcus called again. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over?" He arrived that evening looking tired and frustrated. We sat in my living room, not the kitchen where we usually had our serious conversations. "Mom, I went grocery shopping this weekend," he said. "Do you know how much groceries cost?" I waited. "We spent $300 and barely filled the cart. How is that possible?" "Marcus, you and Vivian have expensive tastes. Organic everything, specialty items, the highest quality products available. When you're paying for it yourself, you notice the cost." He ran his hands through his hair. "I had no idea you were spending so much on our groceries." "I know you didn't. I never told you the actual amounts because I didn't want you to feel bad about accepting help. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. It wasn't just about the money." I took a deep breath. "Your wife called my cooking poison. In my own home. After I'd spent a full day preparing a meal for her. That wasn't about dietary concerns or health consciousness. That was cruel and disrespectful. And the fact that you didn't defend me tells me that you've started to see my cooking the same way she does." Marcus looked stricken. "Mom, that's not true." "Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me to cook something for you? When was the last time you complimented a meal I made? When was the last time you asked for one of my recipes?" He opened his mouth to answer and then closed it again. "I understand that you love Vivian," I continued. "I understand that you want to make her happy. But, Marcus, you can't make someone happy by allowing them to disrespect your mother. And you can't build a marriage on a foundation of entitlement and ingratitude." We sat in silence for a long moment. "What do you want me to do, Mom?" "I want you to think about what respect means in a family. I want you to consider whether the way Vivian treats me is the way you want your mother to be treated. And I want you to understand that my generosity isn't unlimited. I helped you because I love you, but I won't continue to help someone who treats me with contempt." Marcus left that night without any promises or commitments, but I could see that he was thinking, really thinking, maybe for the first time in a while. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new routine. I cooked for myself, for friends, for church functions. I rediscovered the joy of preparing food for people who appreciated it. Mrs. Henderson and I started a weekly cooking session, and she brought her daughter-in-law, who was eager to learn traditional recipes. I joined a supper club that met monthly at different members' homes. I contributed to potluck dinners at church. I even started volunteering at the community kitchen downtown, helping prepare meals for families in need. These people didn't take my cooking for granted. They were grateful for every meal, and their appreciation reminded me why I'd fallen in love with cooking in the first place. About 6 weeks after I'd cut off the grocery subsidy, Marcus called with news that surprised me. "Mom, Vivian and I are having some problems." I listened without commenting. "She's been stressed about money since we started paying for our own groceries. She keeps saying we can't afford to eat the way we want to eat. And when I suggested that maybe we could adjust our expectations, she got angry." "I see." "She said I was taking your side over hers. She said that if I was a better husband, I would convince you to help us again." I felt a familiar surge of anger, but I kept my voice calm. "And what did you say to that?" "I told her that you didn't owe us anything, that you'd been more than generous, and that she'd been disrespectful. I told her that if she wanted your help, she needed to apologize." This was more than I'd expected from Marcus. "And what did she say to that?" She said she had nothing to apologize for. She said she was just being honest about outdated cooking methods and unhealthy ingredients. We sat with that for a moment. "Marcus," I said finally, "I can't tell you what to do about your marriage, but I can tell you that I won't resume helping with groceries until I receive a genuine apology from Vivian. Not an explanation or a justification, but an actual apology for disrespecting me in my own home." "I understand," he said quietly. "And Mom? I'm sorry too. I should have defended you that night. I should have spoken up when she was being disrespectful. I was trying to keep the peace, but I was wrong." His apology meant more to me than I can express. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot to me." 2 months passed without any word from Vivian. Marcus and I talked regularly, and our relationship slowly began to heal. He even asked me to teach him how to make my beef stew, admitting that he'd been craving comfort food, but couldn't afford to eat out as much as they had been. We spent a Saturday afternoon in my kitchen, and I walked him through the recipe step by step. He took notes, asked questions, and genuinely seemed to enjoy the process. When we sat down to eat the finished stew, he took a bite and closed his eyes. "Mom, this is exactly what I remember from childhood. This is home." I started crying, and he hugged me across the kitchen table. "I'm sorry I let anyone make you feel like this wasn't good enough," he said. "Your cooking is love. It always has been." 3 months after the great grocery cutoff, something unexpected happened. Vivian called me directly. "Dolores, I wonder if we could have lunch. I'd like to talk to you." We met at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown. Vivian looked different somehow. Thinner, maybe, and definitely more subdued than I'd ever seen her. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. I waited. "I was wrong to say what I said about your cooking. It was cruel and disrespectful, and I hurt you deliberately. I'm sorry." It was a start, but I needed to understand more. "Why did you say it, Vivian?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I was jealous. This wasn't what I'd expected." "Jealous of what?" "Jealous of the way Marcus talks about your cooking. Jealous of the way he lights up when he talks about your family dinners. Jealous of the fact that you can make him happy in a way that I can't." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook yet. "So, you decided to attack something that was important to me?" "I thought if I could convince Marcus that your cooking was unhealthy, outdated, wrong somehow, then maybe he'd stop comparing everything I made to what you made. Maybe he'd appreciate my efforts more." "Vivian, did it ever occur to you to ask me to teach you some of my recipes? To include you in the tradition instead of trying to tear it down?" She looked surprised. "I never thought. I assumed you wouldn't want to teach me." "Why would you assume that?" "Because I'm not like you. I didn't grow up in a family that cooked together. My mother worked 80-hour weeks and we ate a lot of takeout and frozen meals. I never learned how to make the kind of food that makes people feel loved." For the first time since I'd known her, Vivian seemed genuinely vulnerable. I began to understand that her criticism of my cooking might have come from a place of insecurity rather than malice. "Vivian," I said carefully, "cooking is a skill that can be learned. But more than that, it's an expression of care. The reason Marcus responds to my cooking the way he does isn't because I use some magical ingredients. It's because he can taste the love in it." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "But here's what you need to understand," I continued. "Even if your criticism came from jealousy or insecurity, it still hurt me deeply. And the fact that you accepted my financial help for 2 years, without ever acknowledging it, or showing gratitude. That showed me something about your character that concerned me. I know, she whispered. I took advantage of your generosity, and I was ungrateful. I'm ashamed of how I behaved. We sat in silence for a moment. What do you want from me now, Vivian? I want to learn, she said. I want to learn how to cook, the way you do. Not just the recipes, but the heart of it. I want to be able to make Marcus feel love through food the way you do. And what about the grocery situation? She shook her head. I'm not asking for that. I understand why you stopped, and I don't expect you to start again. Marcus and I need to handle our own responsibilities. But I was hoping. Maybe you'd be willing to teach me how to shop smarter, how to cook more economically, how to make good food without spending a fortune. This conversation was taking a turn I hadn't anticipated. I studied Vivian's face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. What I saw instead was genuine remorse and a kind of desperate hope. Teaching you to cook would mean spending time together, I said. It would mean you coming to my kitchen regularly, learning family recipes, becoming part of traditions that have been passed down for generations. Are you prepared for that? Yes, she said immediately. If you're willing to give me a chance. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let her figure things out on her own as consequences for her disrespect. But a larger part of me recognized an opportunity, not just to heal our relationship, but to pass on traditions to someone who might actually appreciate them once she understood their value. All right, I said finally. But we start small, one recipe at a time. And Vivian, if you ever speak to me disrespectfully again, if you ever take my generosity for granted again, there won't be another chance. I understand, she said, looking relieved. Thank you, Dolores. I know I don't deserve this opportunity. No, I agreed. You don't. But maybe you can earn it. We started the following Saturday with something simple. My grandmother's chicken soup. Vivian came to my kitchen, dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back, ready to work. I taught her how to select a good chicken, how to build flavor in the broth, how to know when the noodles were perfectly cooked. She asked thoughtful questions and took careful notes. When we sat down to eat the finished soup, she took a spoonful and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. This is incredible, she said. I can taste the difference. It tastes like comfort. That's exactly right, I said. That's what good cooking should do. Over the following weeks, our Saturday cooking lessons became a regular routine. I taught her my beef stew, my pierogi, my green bean casserole. She practiced during the week and reported back on her successes and failures. Gradually, I watched her confidence grow and her appreciation for traditional cooking deepen. More importantly, I watched her relationship with Marcus improve. He started coming home to the smell of homemade food. He started talking about dinner with enthusiasm again, and Vivian started understanding why my cooking had been such an important part of his childhood. About 2 months into our cooking lessons, Vivian brought up the subject I'd been wondering about. Dolores, I want to contribute to the grocery costs for our lessons. I know you're spending money on ingredients to teach me, and it's not fair for you to absorb that expense. I was impressed that she'd thought of this on her own. That's very considerate, Vivian. Also, she continued, I've been thinking about what you said about gratitude. I realized that I never properly thanked you for all the help you gave us. I calculated what we would have spent on groceries over those 2 years, and I want to find a way to show you how grateful I am. Vivian, you don't need to. Please, she interrupted, Let me do this. I need to do this. The following week, she presented me with a photo album she'd made. It was filled with pictures of all the meals I'd taught her to cook, along with handwritten copies of the recipes and notes about what each dish meant to our family. On the first page, she'd written, "To Dolores, who taught me that cooking is love made visible. Thank you for your patience, your generosity, and your willingness to share your family's traditions with someone who didn't deserve them, but desperately needed them." I cried when I read it. But the real surprise came the following Sunday when Vivian and Marcus arrived for dinner, a tradition we'd slowly begun to rebuild. Vivian was carrying a covered dish. "I made something for today," she said, looking nervous. I wanted to contribute to our family dinner. She'd made my grandmother's apple cake, and it was nearly perfect. The texture was light and moist. The apples were tender, and she'd even managed to get the crumb topping just right. "Vivian," I said, taking my first bite. "This is wonderful. You've really mastered this recipe." Marcus took a bite and his eyes widened. "This tastes just like Grandma's cake. Mom, you've created a monster. Now I'm going to expect homemade desserts all the time." We all laughed, and for the first time since they'd been married, I felt like we were actually a family sitting around my table. But the story doesn't end there, because the most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't the immediate consequences. It was the long-term changes it created. 6 months after I'd cut off their grocery subsidy, Marcus and Vivian had learned to budget properly, to shop smart, and to appreciate the value of home-cooked meals. They were cooking together regularly, trying new recipes, and actually enjoying the process of preparing their own food. Vivian had lost the entitled attitude that had made her so difficult to be around. She'd learned to express gratitude, to contribute rather than just consume, and to understand that relationships require reciprocity. Most importantly, she'd learned that my cooking wasn't poison. It was tradition, culture, and love, all wrapped up in recipes that had sustained our family for generations. 1 year after the Great Grocery Rebellion, Vivian called me with exciting news. "Dolores, I have something to tell you. Marcus and I are expecting a baby." I was overjoyed, of course, but what she said next touched me even more deeply. "I want to learn all of your family recipes before the baby comes. I want to be able to pass them down to our child. I want them to grow up knowing the taste of home the way Marcus did." That's when I knew that my decision to cut off their groceries had accomplished something more valuable than simple revenge. It had forced Vivian to confront her own shortcomings and choose to become a better person. It had saved my relationship with my son. And it had ensured that my family's traditions would continue to the next generation. The baby, a beautiful little girl they named Elena, arrived healthy and perfect 8 months later. When she was old enough to sit in a high chair, Vivian brought her to our Saturday cooking lessons. I taught my granddaughter to crack eggs, to measure flour, and to taste everything as we cooked. Elena's first word wasn't mama or dada. It was cookie, which she said while reaching for one of my homemade sugar cookies. I couldn't have been prouder. Now, 3 years later, our Saturday cooking lessons have evolved into family traditions. Marcus joins us sometimes, and we all cook together. Elena, now a precocious 3-year-old, has her own little apron and insists on helping with everything. Vivian has become an excellent cook in her own right, but more than that, she's become the daughter-in-law I'd always hoped she could be. She's grateful, respectful, and genuinely interested in our family's history and traditions. Last Christmas, she surprised me with a cookbook she'd made by hand. It contained all of my recipes, but more than that, it contained the stories behind them, the history of each dish, memories of family gatherings where they'd been served, and notes about what made each recipe special to our family. I want Elena to have this someday, she said when she gave it to me. I want her to know where she comes from, and I want her to understand that food is more than just nutrition. It's how we show love to each other. Marcus hugged me that day and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us, Mom. Thank you for teaching us what we needed to learn." But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 2 years ago, during Elena's second birthday party. We were all in my kitchen, preparing food for the celebration, when one of Vivian's friends stopped by. "Oh my God, Vivian," the friend said. "Everything smells amazing. Did you make all of this?" "I made some of it," Vivian replied. "But most of this is Dolores' cooking. She's an amazing cook. She taught me everything I know. I'm so lucky to have a mother-in-law who was willing to share her family recipes with me." The friend took a bite of my pierogi and practically swooned. "These are incredible. Can I get the recipe?" Vivian looked at me with a question in her eyes. I nodded and she said, "You'll have to ask Dolores. They're her grandmother's recipe, and she decides who gets to learn them." In that moment, I realized that Vivian had learned the most important lesson of all. That some things are earned, not given. That respect and trust have to be demonstrated over time. That being part of a family means understanding your place. In something larger than yourself, the friend did ask me for the recipe, and I politely declined. "These are family recipes," I explained. "They're passed down to people who will treasure them and continue the tradition." The friend looked disappointed, but Vivian smiled at me with understanding. She knew what it meant to be trusted with something precious, because she'd almost lost that trust and had to work hard to earn it back. Looking back now, I can see that cutting off their grocery subsidy was the best thing I could have done for all of us. It forced difficult conversations that needed to happen. It established boundaries that needed to be set. It taught lessons about gratitude, respect, and the true value of generosity. But most importantly, it saved our family relationships. If I'd continued to enable Vivian's entitled behavior, if I'd kept subsidizing their lifestyle while accepting disrespect in return, the resentment would have grown until it poisoned our family completely. Instead, by standing up for myself and demanding better treatment, I created the opportunity for real growth and healing. I showed Marcus that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. I showed Vivian that actions have consequences, but also that redemption is possible for those willing to do the work. And I showed myself that I didn't have to choose between being generous and being respected. I could be both, but only if I insisted on being treated with the dignity I deserved. These days, my kitchen is once again the heart of family gatherings. Elena runs to me with flour-covered hands, chattering excitedly about the cookies we're making. Marcus brings friends over for dinner, bragging about his mother's cooking. Vivian asks for my advice on meal planning and budgeting, genuinely valuing my experience and expertise. The grocery subsidy never resumed, and it never needed to. Marcus and Vivian learned to manage their own finances, to make smart shopping decisions, and to appreciate the cost of the food they ate. They became more grateful for special meals, more invested in the cooking process, and more connected to the traditions they were participating in. Sometimes Vivian still brings ingredients when she comes for our cooking lessons, insisting on contributing to the cost. Sometimes she'll text me pictures of meals she's made, proud of her growing skills. Sometimes she'll call just to ask how much salt to add to a recipe, treating my expertise with the respect it deserves. Last week, Elena asked me to teach her how to make Grandma Dolores' special soup. As I lifted her up to help her stir the pot, I thought about how different things might have been if I hadn't stood up for myself that day when Vivian called my cooking poison. Elena might never have learned these recipes. Marcus might have continued to distance himself from family traditions. Vivian might have continued to take generosity for granted while offering nothing but criticism in return. Instead, we're a family. A real family, built on mutual respect, shared traditions, and the understanding that love requires both giving and receiving. My grandmother's recipes are safe in Elena's small hands. My son has remembered what home tastes like. My daughter-in-law has learned that cooking is indeed love made visible. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept mistreatment, even from family. Especially from family. The woman who called my cooking poison learned to make that same poison with her own hands, and now she serves it to her daughter with pride. The son who didn't defend me learned to stand up for what matters. The granddaughter who never knew her great-great-grandmother will carry on her recipes and remember her story. That's not revenge. That's redemption. And it's more satisfying than any immediate punishment could ever have been. Sometimes people ask me if I regret being so harsh, if I think I overreacted to Vivienne's comment. My answer is always the same. I regret that it took me so long to demand the respect I deserved. I regret that I allowed the situation to deteriorate to the point where such drastic action was necessary. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret teaching my family that generosity and respect must go hand in hand. And I don't regret creating the circumstances that allowed all of us to become better people. My cooking was never poison, but the dynamics in our family were toxic, and sometimes you have to cut out the poison to save the patient. Now, when I set my table with the good china and serve meals made with love and decades of experience, everyone who sits at that table knows exactly how valuable the experience is. They know because they've learned the cost of taking it for granted. And that, as they say, was that. Sometimes you have to show people you're not to be trifled with. What do you think? Did they get what they deserved? Or would you have handled it differently? I'd love to read your opinions in the comments below. Have you ever had to teach a lesson to someone who took you for granted? Share your story if you feel comfortable. If you enjoyed seeing these folks get their comeuppance and want more stories of well-deserved revenge, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and click the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for listening, and remember to stand up for yourselves.